Welcome to week 2 of Advertising Designing Desires. This week is a little bit different than last week. We're going to move not from what we're doing now, but we're trying to think historically, trying to work through the meaning of advertising and how that informs what we do now. Because the reality is, we're all humans and we're all influenced by this over many, many years. And the kinds of influences that work now probably worked in the past as well. So, as you can see, the title of today's but this week's discussion, this week's work, is the origins of consumer culture and the origins of advertising. All right, well, let's move into it a little bit more. Now, one of the things that's really clear about advertising is that it did exist millennia ago in different techniques. It doesn't matter what era, if you'd rather say it that way, you lived in or live in, they all had some version of this kind of promotional culture. Now, I've happened to find this lovely image from Ephesus, which is a couple of millennia ago. And you can see in this advertisement, an advertisement for a brothel. Or you can see this thing. And it's basically a walkway advertisement. Maybe that was big at that time. Apparently there were tons of these kinds of things also in Pompeii. And Ephesus is now in modern day Turkey. But apparently in this ad, there's a heart here and a foot, which is implying where you go, and a woman somehow attached here. And somehow, probably it's been worn away a little bit, but this implied that if you kept moving in that direction, you're going to get to a brothel and possibly have a very good time. So what we know about advertising is it's a form of communication that has existed for a long time. Now, if we think a little bit more contemporary, one of the things about the development of what's called an anthropological type consumer culture is that it began to be much more dependent on advertising. Consumer culture as an anthropological type is a way in which some writers about advertising have looked at its emergence in somewhere between the 16th and 19th century. And consumer culture is very much attached to all sorts of other things that transformed during those 3 centuries. The biggest transformation was a move from something pre-industrial or kind of traditional society into something industrial. And in that movement, what happened was that most people could no longer make most of the things that they needed to get through everyday life. And this is a key transformation and is the basis kind of consumer culture. So the things that you're wearing, if you just happen to look down, I won't do that, but almost everything that I have is not made by me or anyone in my family. That was not the case 250 years ago. And progressively, that has become the change and the basis of a kind of different kind of culture. Not a traditional culture, but a culture that we're calling, in this class at least, consumer culture. Now, in its early formations, advertising appealed to consumers as if they knew things in the same way people who made things in traditional culture would know things. They know how to make their food, they know how to make their clothing. And you would find in early advertising this idea that you had to provide a lot of information. And there was this fundamental belief, and this is what's changed in different eras of consumer culture, that we are rational. The individual is a rational being that needs to have everything explained. And one of the things that you'll see in early advertising is that they will explain where things are made and who made it and what happens. And in this little bit here, you're finding, here's an ad for Coca-Cola. If you looked at an ad for Coca-Cola in the 20th century, this is a 19th century one, they wouldn't explain that it's great headache specific or delicious, or They might say those sorts of things, but they wouldn't explain where it comes from. The cocoa plant and the cocoa leaves, they probably wouldn't give that kind of detail, but they might talk again about that end benefit idea. So one of the purposes of advertising is it's an engine of expansion of markets. So consumer culture eliminates the knowledge base, has eliminated the knowledge base of how we make things. It's replaced by industrialization, and advertising helps us understand, in a sense, what we should buy and not buy and why we should buy it. So as industrialization gained force, it was connected to capitalism, and one of the engines of capitalism is that it is driven to grow, an economy that keeps expanding. Attached to that was a change in the individual, a change in the way that we saw ourselves. And this is something that's in your readings this week, and that is that there was something that emerged about the 19th century, which is that we believed, as opposed to what happened in traditional culture, we believed that we could transform ourselves. And that transformation of ourselves was the basis of a lot of advertising, that we could change ourselves for the better. And that's that notion of some therapy, a therapeutic ethic, kind of invading what we could describe as early consumer culture and becoming quite dominant by the 20th century. The last point I want to make here is all of this development of consumer culture is built on a very romantic notion of the self. And what that means, what does a romantic notion of the self mean? It means that we think that we can change who we are and change what we become. So again, traditional society, you were a carpenter, you were always a carpenter. You were the wife of a carpenter, you were the children of a carpenter. Nothing changed. In the 19th century into the 20th century, some idea, and it was built from novels as much as music, as much as the products that appeared in department stores by the late 19th century, that you could, even for a moment, change yourself for Saturday night. And no one would know that you're a carpenter. That in fact you might be the richest looking person on the dance floor. And in that transformation, you had a sense of the possibilities of what could be, or through the objects that you surrounded yourself with, the clothes you wore, the way that you dressed, all those things, the style of your hair, all those things were partly constructing a self that wasn't determined by something quite traditional, but something quite modern. Let's go on to a little bit more here about this week. You can see that one of the things that happened with advertising as it connected to this consumer culture is it had to convince us that something that they produced was really, really good for us. And if you remember, I mentioned that therapeutic ethos. One of the biggest developments in the 19th century was the development of patent medicines. And patent medicines are, yes, as implied by the name, they are kind of registered or patented ideas that some inventor, if we can call it that, had pulled something probably from the ground, put it in a bottle, mixed it up, and sold it to you as if it was medicinal. Unlike now, where there might be all sorts of regulations about what these things are actually doing, then there were no regulations, and all your information was provided by the advertisements that were attached to these sorts of products. So I've kind of listed two here, and you're going to see more when you do your own analysis later, but they're just filled with puffery. So Pond's extract cures catarrh, I'm not actually sure what that is, rheumatism, sore throat, neuralgia, diphtheria, and hemorrhages of all sorts. That's quite a broad field there. And it implies that something about this product is almost a cure-all. It's interesting over here, we've talked about Coca-Cola, which was obsessed with cocaine as well in its early incarnations. Here we have this idea that you could just give two children for medicinal purposes, a little bit of cocaine to get through their toothaches. Interesting sort of things. Things that you would not see now would be not only unethical, but probably against the law, what these people were presenting really, and this is interesting, only at the end of the 19th century. So this idea of puffing up what something can do, something that can therapeutically help you, is at the core of modern advertising. And that puffing up is a term, and it's a term that was used to describe advertising in the 19th century. It's called puffery. And I want you to think about and use that kind of term when you look at historical ads this sort of week. So let's go on and check out a bit more of what I want you to do this week. So we're moving to the difference between the rational self and the irrational self. Something in advertising in the 19th century, it was a belief that people were rational, and somewhere in the 20th century, based on research, based on psychology research, based on a lot of market work, they began to believe about 1920 that we were in fact, irrational. We made decisions based on emotions. And what I want you to do this week is definitely read the readings, Lear's and Story. They're not easy readings, and I want you to work through them as well as you can. In the discussion board resources, I have got 2 ads that I want you to take a look at and analyze, and present what you think is the analysis of those. Then I want you to do something that pushes you a little bit, and it will push you towards where the assignment is going, the Gallery 1 assignment. And I want you to find a parallel ad, not the same as the 2 ads that I have there. One's about snake oils and one's about soap. But I want you to take them and analyze them and compare them and try to work out the way these ads were constructing an emerging consumer culture. The only way you're going to be able to do this well is if you do the readings closely. And to help you with that is added to the keywords resource, the keywords that are derived from these 2 articles. Again, I'm going to tell you, they're harder than they were last week, the readings, but they're really, really useful to get us through how did we get to this point where more or less advertising believes us as kind of a bit silly, whereas advertising 150 years ago thought we were incredibly rational and we had to have all this information about it. Now we live in this incredible world of just images and bizarre things that happen in advertising. I want you to be able to make sense of that through looking at these historical ads and post those things so you can help other people work it out as well. So what is still modern about these ads that you see, and what is kind of faded? We don't use it as much anymore. I'm going to give you one more thing to think about. That is that one of the things about historical ads is that because they weren't using as much images in their ads, they tended to be a bit like what we would call classified ads. What's interesting about classified ads is that we don't look at them as much anymore. I want you to work out as well, where have classified ads gone? Classified ads would be in newspapers, they're still there. But where have they gone? Where in online culture do we find incredible information of selling specific products in the way that we used to see them in newspapers? So good luck this week. I really enjoyed your posts, those people who did post on the discussion board last week. I learned a lot. I hope the rest of you read other people's, because you're going to learn a lot as you go to completing the first assignment. And from here on in, we're going to get closer and closer to making sense of that, what we're doing in that first assignment and the value of it and its connection to all this interesting writing and thinking about advertising. Good luck.